Trucker Dave here, and today we're going to talk about used engines. If you've been working on cars for more than a minute or two, you know that engines are a big deal. They get expensive from time to time, and you end up eventually needing one. Or you might blow yours up like I have, or you'll spin a bearing and whatnot. So I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks I use when looking for a used engine. And I got a couple engines here and we're going to go over them. This is a 351 Cleveland out of a 1970 Cougar. It's all set up. I bought it off Facebook, that and a bunch of other parts for a really good deal. Now, this is going to be going in that Torino over there, hopefully. So you need to know the difference between a Cougar and a Torino when you're doing something like this. Now granted, the engine itself is the same. The casting codes are pretty close. I've run the numbers on it. They're 2 years apart. Well, no, 3. They're 2, yeah. One's a 70 and one's a late 72 in this Torino. So that shouldn't seem like a whole lot, but you have to remember that it was in a completely different model of car. So if there's any exhaust on it, that probably won't fit. It might, but it probably won't. The engine mounts will be different also. And you also have to look, if you get a transmission with it, you need to make sure, if you're going to bolt it up, you have the right bell housing for the transmission. If you're doing a clutch, well, that's something else completely. We'll skip that for now, but we'll go over it here in a minute. Because the bare basic engine is the same. We can forget the transmission stuff. The bare basic engine is the same, but all the stuff that's bolted on it can be different. When I go to put this engine in the Torino, the accessories are going to have to be changed. It's always a good idea to change the water pump and the gaskets. This engine supposedly has been sitting on a stand for 10 years. So you're going to have to pull the spark plugs out. Here, put a little Marvel's Mystery Oil in there and give it a spin very slowly. These mounts are out of a Cougar. They will not fit in a Torino. It's always a good idea to put a new oil pump on. And when you're getting an engine out of an unknown car, you need to make sure you have the right oil pump, pickup, and pan. Another thing people overlook is the flywheel. I'm going to take the flywheel that's made it up to this transmission and this starter whole setup, and I'm going to put it on here. There's a good chance that it's the same, but I know this flywheel's good, and I know it's made up for the accessories and the harmonic balancer and all that for the other car. So we're going to swap that over too. It came with a nice Edelbrock Performer intake, so I'm kind of happy about that. And that'll bolt right up to the carburetor I have. This is universal. You can put any carburetor you want on this. So that makes it nice. Whether I want to put a Rochester Quadrajet or a Thermoquad or an Edelbrock, I can get one on this. Now let's say that you don't have an old car like this. You've got a 95, 97 Mustang and you found a 5.0, but you're thinking about a 351 Windsor, and stuff like that. You're kind of wondering what to upgrade, what to downgrade. It's important to know the difference. A Windsor will bolt up pretty good. It's basically a 302 that's been punched out. A Cleveland, a modified in a Windsor, while all displacing 351 cubic inches, are all 3 completely separate engines. And when you're putting your engine in, you need to know that. So if I wanted to replace this 351 Cleveland with a 351 modified or a 351 Windsor, it wouldn't just be a quick drop-in. And you need to be aware of the transmission bell housing you have. Let's go back to the bell housing and what was originally in the engine, or what originally was in the car, excuse me. So that's a good place to start. And this is where Facebook Marketplace comes in. This is a 302 I bought. Came out of a 93 Explorer. I'm thinking it's been rebuilt. It's got a new rear main. I traded for it. I got a good deal on it. and I can see the heads have been reworked and all that. But I don't know anything about this engine. So you kind of take your life into your own hands when you buy a used engine. But there are some advantages here. This is where knowing your engine is important. The thing about a 302 or a 5.0 out of an Explorer versus a 5.0 out of a Mustang is there's no difference. You're going to have to change out the oil pan, you're going to have to change out the pickup, but they are actually the same engine. So if you go and tell the guy at the parts, you know, when you go buy an engine, I need an engine for a Mustang 5.0, he's going to charge you a Mustang price. If you say I need an engine out of an Explorer, there's a good chance you're going to get a cheaper engine. These are just little tips and tricks you need to be mindful of when you're searching for a used engine. Ideally, you want an engine that you've heard run. You want a virgin core. You want one that hasn't been taken apart before. If this is your first time or you're going to rebuild it fresh, it's often good to get that, because if you buy an engine that's been rebuilt, especially off things like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, there's a good chance it was rebuilt by a bunch of carb cleaner, brake clean, and Krylon. And unless there's a certificate with it saying that it was rebuilt, which is kind of crap too, you know, unless he can actually prove it, it's not really, you take your life in your own hands. What you look for is a virgin core. That means that engine's never been apart, and those are the ideal engines to rebuild. Now, as time goes on, these engines are getting more and more scarce because people are picking them up cheap because they also want virgin cores. If you get a rebuilt engine, there's a good chance it's been bored out. And if they built it wrong and they scoured a cylinder or spun a cam bearing or ran it dry, chances are you might have to get it rebored. And if it's already 40 out and you have to go 60, you've got one shot. So that's a problem. And then if you decide to sleeve it and all that, there's a lot of technologies out there that allow sleeving. But unless you're rebuilding an original 1940 something or anything like that, sleeving's really not ideal. I mean, it'll work in a pinch. I don't like it, but you know, it'll work. It's just, for what we're doing, it's really not ideal. Now, I talk about taking your life into your own hands, and I kind of did that with this. Yeah, I saw the truck it came out of, it was running, and well, I talk about swapping an oil pan, just on a side note, is a lot of these engines we're getting now are coming out of trucks. Well, people like truck engines thinking that they're stronger or better, and a lot of them really are. But, you know, like when it comes to the LS3 truck engines, those are real popular right now. But there's other engines that are good too. But truck engines usually have a rear sump, and cars usually have a front sump. So you need to keep things in mind. Now, this engine here, I saw it run, and I'll explain it. I've watched this engine get fired up. The guy ran it for me before he pulled it. It ran good, had good oil pressure and all that. Had a little bit of a lifter rattle, so I thought, when he fired it up. I didn't think nothing of it because it quieted right up, and it was seemed like a good engine. So pulled it out, brought it home, started tearing it apart, and we came around here, and the thrust bearings are shot, and I'll show you that. This was the knock. See? So we had a little bit of a crankshaft problem. You know, the bearings are out in it. It needs a new, or the thrust bearings are out. Now, if you're going to get a rebuilt engine, buy one from a reputable guy. If you got a cousin that rebuilds engines and he rebuilds the engine in his car every year, it's not a good engine. I mean, he's breaking it every year. He may be rough, but no, you really just, no, don't insult him. Just show up with an engine one day and put it in. He'd be mad, but at least you'll have a car that runs and he doesn't have to pay the bills. So just be mindful of what you're doing with these used engines. When you're buying a used engine off Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace and all that, if they're not charging you core price for it or you can't hear it run, it's usually best just to skip it unless it's a deal you can't be beat. These Clevelands are getting pretty expensive. For me to buy a reman from ATK, they're $4,100 retail. I could probably get one cheaper if I knew a dealer. But a 5.0, you know, they're a dime a dozen right now. So it's up to you. You know, I'd love to have a reman 351, and that's probably why I bought this one here out of this Cougar. But, you know, it's going to take some work, and I'll show you what has to happen with that. First thing when you get an engine you're going to want to do is take the oil pan off and look inside. I was told this had a rear main leak, but from looking at it, I'm betting it's just leaking because they didn't get the corners sealed up. But I'll have to take that apart and check it. We're going to want to look inside here to make sure that's all clean. And just for some good preventive maintenance, replace the oil pump. If I hadn't went to replace the oil pump and put everything together, I never would have found this. So it's always important to look. But I can look in here and see that overall this is actually a really clean, good engine. So replace the thrust bearings. It should go right back together. While you have it off, look at the timing chain. It's got a little bit of slack. It wouldn't hurt to replace it. It's a nice double roller. You can get a stock one, or you can go and buy a Pete Jackson gear drive or a brand new double roller, and it should do everything you want it to do. It's a good preventive maintenance. If you're going to have the engine apart anyways, you might as well spend the money and do it right. Also, you're going to want to take the valve covers off and replace the gaskets. And, you know, you wouldn't hurt to take the intake off. Nothing here really needs to be torqued, nothing serious. I mean, yeah, you torque the intake on. But, I mean, look in here. Once you get it to rotate fine and you have some oil pressure, make sure make sure the cam's not wiped. Make sure the valves go up and down like they're supposed to. And that's just some good preventative maintenance also. You know, that's what we're going to do with this one here. You know, we'll spin it around and watch the cams go up and down, and that'll work. So I need to get a stand for this. All in all, buying a used engine isn't that big of a deal. If you know what you're doing and you're patient, the deals will come to you. You just have to be aware of what you're looking for and have to know what you want. Like I said, you know, I thought about putting that 4.6 into this Torino, but that's a lot of work. You know, so that's why I'm putting a Cleveland back into it. It's going to cost me less to do that. You know, if you had an idea of wanting to update your car, especially with these computer controlled cars, and you're kind of on a budget, dropping a 4.6 into a Mustang that has a 5.0 in it probably is not going to be the best economical move, because I would imagine you're going to have to change out some computer stuff. And it's, I don't know, I've never done it, and I don't know if I'd want to, but those 4.6s are pretty cool. But I digress. The amount of work is going to depend on how much pain and agony and money you're willing to shell out to have what you want. And in reality, that's kind of what it comes down to. What do you want? What's your budget? And where do those two lines intersect? You have to know that before you start. I bought these other two Ford engines. I was going to put them in another Torino I had. And the whole deal, the wheels came off it, and that thing hit the ground, spun sideways, and flipped over in a ditch. So it never happened. I don't have that Torino anymore. But this one's going to get a stock engine, because I know the old one will come out, the new one will go right in. Everything will plug in like it's supposed to. And if this engine's ready to go, there's no reason I can't have that engine in this car in about 3 hours and running, if everything goes well, which it rarely does. So these are things you need to think about. You know, do you need the car? Because if this is your daily driver, you need to find something as close to what you're taking out to put back in, because if you only have Saturday to do it and you need that thing running Saturday night, you don't have time to screw around. You know, you need the old out, the new in, and you need to go, because there's a lot of people out there where they only got one car and they only got one shot to get it done because, hey, they got to go to work, baby. Now, there's another neat thing about buying a used engine versus buying a reman, and I'm going to show you that now. What I like buying used engines for is because of all the extras that come with it. A reman is going to be a short block or a long block. It's going to have the basics. You won't get the valve covers, you won't get the exhaust, you won't get the pulleys, you won't get the water pump, you know, you won't get the distributor. Used engines, for the most part, come with everything. These had the whole 5.0 fuel injection set up when I got them. You know, I wasn't going to use it because I've got a nice set of Hedman headers right here, and I've got all sorts of valve covers and intakes, and I've got everything I need. Also, if you decide to go from a V-belt to a serpentine setup, try to get the whole setup, because you don't want to have to go try to start piecing these things out. If the serpentine setup is still on the front of the engine, get it all. Get everything they'll let you have with it. Because if you want it to go from, like I said, if you want to go from a V-belt to a serpentine, this is the easiest and cheapest way to do it. Because if you have to piece it out, you're going to spend as much for the serpentine setup that you did for the engine. I hope all this has been helpful. Engines are expensive, and none of us are really floating in a lot of cash. So I'm hopefully that some of these tips and tricks I've shared here will help you when it comes to find your next engine. So I appreciate it, and thank you for watching.